How is everybody doing? This is the 4:30 time slot, so I have created a probabilistic experiment, since we're all talking about AI, and that is I have taken a full glass of water on a slanted podium that rattles. So we'll see what happens. But my throat's been a little dry today, so I thought that would help me get through the whole thing. So with that, it's kind of an interesting lead-in. What's interesting and what's changing for the Chief Data Office isn't analytics or AI. Everyone thinks it's AI. It's autonomy. And it's autonomy because we are now enabling systems to be able to act on their own. And that's the big difference to how we get things into production. Trust, context, policy, predictability are now at the forefront of everything that we do. So with that, we're going to talk about today 5 requirements to get data agent ready, so that way you can make things more autonomous, because that's all the value. So first, let me introduce myself. My name is Adam Gunter. I just joined Rocket Software, actually just a couple months ago, leading the Vertica business, a new acquisition that we just made. About 25 years in technology, data, cloud, application infrastructure. Spent 16 years at IBM. Spent 5 years at Equifax, leading their identity and fraud business, where we were the first fraud control model known in the industry to use both supervised and unsupervised machine learning. That's my other interesting data fact for the day. And then spent a few years consulting. And for those who don't know Rocket Software, one of the interesting things about what we do is we are in the middle of back-end mission-critical systems and transformations. And we work with companies around the globe where failure isn't an option. These systems are driving the day-to-day workload, the day-to-day business. And I share that because there's differences with different size companies, and there's differences in different countries. But those underlying trends are always the same. And everything that we're talking about today is rooted in that. So the reason why I really mention our scale is not so much about us. That's good. We want you to remember us. But it's really just about we see this and we know the problems that you're living every single day. Almost every boardroom, and this survey shows 60% is a top priority, 92% overall, are focused and prioritizing IT modernization. But IT modernization by itself is not a business outcome. It's just systems with a lot of promises and a lot of boardroom pressure. And that pressure flows downstream to us in this room, because we're the ones that end up being accountable for turning that data into actual production value. Now, what's interesting with AI is there is a dichotomy that is really emerging that we see in the world. On one end, you've got the boardroom, the C-suite, that is pushing to accelerate AI adoption. Every CEO is looking at, who's using what, how many tokens, let's put the cost nervousness aside. But they are pushing for the use of AI. Then on the other end, you get the people. We're all trying to move as fast as we can and get production value out of that, but it's hard. So I want to tell a story. I was visiting some friends in Florida a few weeks ago. And over breakfast, my friend says to me, "Hey, don't you know something about AI? Can I ask you a question?" And I said, "Yeah, sure. I'll see if I can help." He said, "Okay, at work we just got this Copilot thing." My mind is like, okay, let's see where this goes. And for context, so she is a CSM at a SaaS company. And they're pressuring us to use Copilot. So I thought, hey, maybe I'll have an analysis done. I'll have Copilot look at my accounts, look at different signals, risk factors, and help guide me on where I should be focusing. Maybe I can figure out where to better spend my time and how to better eliminate churn within the company. So she said, so I got excited, and I went into Copilot, and I started prompting away. She said, "Adam, it's like a bunch of garbage came out. It's like, I don't get it. It didn't understand what I needed it to understand about my business." And I went to our IT team, and I complained, because everyone's been talking about all this modernization we're doing, and they throw around terms like data fabric and data lakes, and we have all this data there, and all this is supposed to be connected. But they told me that Copilot can't actually look at all of that data. Like, why is that? Why can't they do that? I don't understand what we're doing. That conversation is like a microcosm of conversations that we see over and over and over again. And what that's doing is that's putting pressure on the chief data office, on the chief data and analytics officer, to help enable that data for AI so those workers can be productive. And so what's changing is not the scope. The scope of what we do is the same, but it's the exposure. We're now in the front line to things that are at the boardroom blocking innovation. So, what are experts doing differently? Experts, the ones that are making progress, are not innovating faster. They're actually not focused on doing more. They're not the ones that are focused on how do we get 10,000 employees using AI at 10x the amount. They're instead focused on operational fundamentals and building that early into the process. They're thinking about data quality. They're thinking about governance. They're thinking about AI infrastructure. They're thinking about how do we build a system that executives are willing to stand behind and approve at scale and in production. And when you bring in that discipline, when you think about governance up front, you actually can break down what we like to talk about as the pilot to production wall. Everyone's got pilots, and it feels like this insurmountable barrier to go from pilot to production. Or if you're in production, it's a lower value use case or less sensitive data, so it's less interesting. And the trick that we do see consistently is the ones that tackle that governance first are the ones that are successful. And the ones that think about AI readiness really as a chief data office control function. And it's something that builds on data management, but it sits foundationally across the enterprise. Because every one of these pillars is trying to use AI. And so how you enable each one is a little bit different. Some of them, when you think about application development, now I've got models that are going out into production that touch a customer. But when we think about trust, when we think about governance, when we think about that across the foundation, we're actually able to get to scale. We don't see a lot of projects actually failing because AI is immature. It's actually because the environment doesn't support accountability. It doesn't support the operations. They don't have that foundation to get to production. So with that and the patterns we've been seeing, really want to talk about 5 requirements for agent-ready data. And if you can go through this list and deliver on these things, you can get from pilot to production and do that at scale. So first, trust and policy as code. Foundational is, do I trust the data? Is it being used for the right reasons? Do I understand that? Once you trust the data, because garbage in is garbage out, it's, do I have all the data? Especially when you start to think about what we're asking AI to do, what we're asking large language models to figure out. A lot of that is knowledge that's in our head. And more where that lives in systems and how we can bring that knowledge into our AI environment is through unstructured data. So the unification, being able to gather all that data. Third, sovereignty by design. And sovereignty is not just location anymore. When we think about AI, it's about control. Are you able to control and understand where data is being exchanged and where it lives? So once I trust the data, feel like my policies are intact, I've got all the data, I can control the data. Now it's about going from data into insights, and really, as I think about it, knowledge. We have to provide deterministic insights to ground these probabilistic AI models. Starts with context and then inference, and we'll talk about both. Now, in the probability, I'm going to lower the probability of this falling by taking a little bit of water. So especially in agentic systems, trust can't be subjective, and it can't be debated after the fact. So I'll get to it in a moment, but I think we have an opportunity to flip from, oh, after the fact, this output was not what I wanted it to be. Why did that happen? Did we have the right data? What's happening? To something we can build in and codify in advance. And that's a power that we didn't have before AI. So leading organizations are treating trust like they would treat uptime or security. Every production AI use case ships with explicit trust SLAs. Freshness, accuracy, coverage, and lineage. And if those aren't met, deployments are blocked. And when you treat trust this way, it becomes a release gate you can defend. Because more and more, especially in AI where people are questioning and the instinct of people is not to trust, being able to defend that output, explainability, becomes a big thing. Because also, as we all know, when AI fails, it doesn't fail quietly. It tends to fail spectacularly. It fails loudly. And you have to ground it in that data. Beyond trust, there's also the policy. The key thing here is treating agents just like you would treat people. You have policy for people, we need data policies around agents. What's their identity? What they can access, what the purpose of that is, and then being able to audit that back. Permissible purpose becomes really important too to codify as policy, and we'll talk more later as well in some examples. But as AI starts to invent and dream new use cases, I've personally run into use cases in my businesses where AI started to think about things where we really didn't actually have the right data rights to do that. Now we had the gates in place, so we didn't see things into production. But if I had to go back 3 years and teach myself some of these principles that we've learned over time, we could have codified that in there and saved time and money along the way. So let's just talk through an example. It was actually in that example I was just talking about. We were trying to bring together data from different lines of businesses to drive new innovation. We basically had two different businesses, both had entity maps. They were really building out these identity knowledge graphs. And we realized that we had a lot of overlap in people, but different types of data. And if we brought together a more complete view of people, is there new business opportunity for the company? And this today, it's a manual process. It involves the data teams, it involves the engineering teams, it involves data stewards we brought in, lawyers got into arguments. And that's okay because this is not something companies do every day. We maybe thought about this once or twice a year in strategy sessions. Companies think about these things, but not every day. That does not scale into the agentic world. Why don't companies do that every single day? Because it's expensive, it's manual, it's bringing people together, it's distracting. But if that knowledge is captured within AI environments, and if I could use large language models to brainstorm, to think about new business ideas, to push the bounds on where we're going, and have AI and agents take place in that for me, we're now on a daily basis, on a regular basis, these new ideas are being thought up. And if we don't build in trust and policy as codified into the system, you will quickly find yourself doing things that put your business at risk. The great thing about it is, let's think about a financial services example. Let's say you're using an agent as part of a loan application process. Loan application, it rejects somebody, they want to know what happens. Right? Today, chief risk officer goes to chief data officer. What happened? Why did we not get the right result from the model? Could be a multitude of reasons why. But if you implement trust and policy as code, and that's codified into the system, you're not going to run into these errors of, oh yeah, we just had an old copy of the data. That's what it used. Sorry. Because the gates are in there to stop the models as they go. So we actually have an opportunity to flip something from reactive to proactive as you're implementing these policies. So we've trusted the data, we've got our policy implemented, now do we have all of the data? And more, that's about unstructured data. One thing I do want to mention, nobody is expecting, and we don't mean to imply that everybody's going to bring all of their data together. Nobody has fully unified structured data and unstructured content. And they don't need to right now. So one of the insights we've kind of gleaned on what agents require is governed retrieval at decision time, not physical unification. Without that governed context, agents can be factually correct, but organizationally wrong at the same time. And that's really where bringing in more data. The most times when you hear the term hallucination a lot, and hallucinations are often, I've gotten blank answers from AI, like it says it did something and you go and look and it didn't. But a lot of times it's just ridiculously wrong information. And context, bringing together structured and unstructured data is a way to combat that. The structured data, of course, tells you what happened, transactions, events, reference data. But the differentiating intelligence comes often from the unstructured data. Policies, contracts, claims, notes, emails, meeting transcripts. I found one company that was actually getting, they must have like infinite budget because they were actually doing video processing on different customer interactions to inject that into their models. I mean, that had to be expensive, but it's powerful if you can do it, and as those costs go down, it's things to think about. So again, a key insight here, don't copy everything. Leading teams are implementing permission-aware retrieval patterns that pull current data and documents at query time. They apply access controls consistently, and they return answers with citations. So you do that, you get that foundation. You're setting that foundation for what I'll talk about later when I get to context, when I get to inference. But think about how you bring together unifying that structured and unstructured data is key, but also think about what unstructured data you're not gathering, because I see that a lot. And as we start to think about, we want to take the knowledge of what's in people's heads, and we want to bring that knowledge and expertise into the models. Sometimes that knowledge lives in places we haven't thought to gather before because we've never asked artificial intelligence to consume that information before. So really moving this from separate approaches to reusable, permission-aware retrieval pattern. Citations, important as well, I will say. So let's talk about sovereignty for a moment, because sovereignty is always thought about, locality, location. And there's a storage problem. I keep the data in the region, in country. Can I use this cloud? Can I not? AI changes the dynamics of that. And really, sovereignty becomes more about where data can be used and the controls that you build around that. Like most things, AI and really getting autonomous means things are going to happen at more speed and at more scale, and control becomes imperative. So who can use it? For what purpose? Through which model or agent? And with what logging? We think about the risk angles of this. You have compliance risk. IP leakage is a big one, as people are putting information out there. Movement, cost, access sprawl. All of this is because of the additional pathways. Chat, retrieval, plugins, agents. When you start to nest those things, this sounds simple, but it becomes more complicated to control than you think. It's not as simple as, we'll block access to public ChatGPT and we'll be good. So really understanding what's happening, what models are calling what, and then how you build a model around it. Turning sovereignty into enforcement and proof problem. So when you think about the controls, enforceable at query and action time is key. Purpose limited, what's allowed, what's not allowed. Model agent aware, you may have different rules by runtimes. And provable with end-to-end audit logs. The goal is not to protect, the goal is to protect regulated and your high-value data without forcing constant movement, without suffocating AI development. Some of these controls, I think, are things that I've seen, even we think about in our own company as, we don't want to stifle innovation. But in reality, what we hear from our employees is that actually helped make it really clear for me what I can do, how I can do it, and gave me the confidence to actually start to use AI more. So, what if a developer connects an AI agent to sensitive repositories? The old model, you're thinking about storage location. In the new model, when you implement these controls, you can answer provably who, what, accessed what, through which model or through which agent, under which purpose, with masking and immutable audit logs. And when you have that together, you now have what you need as a foundation for security and compliance to go forward. And because you're implementing these runtime controls, you're actually making scale possible. And you're becoming a friend of security, a friend of the chief legal office. All right, so we trust our data, we've got our policies, we've gathered all the data. We can control the data. The next two is about knowledge. And it's about grounding AI, which is probabilistic, in more determinism. When you start with raw tables and raw data that you're throwing into AI, you're actually building more probability on top of probability on top of probability. And the further down you go, you run that risk of building bad decisions on top of bad decisions, or run the risk of more hallucinations as you get further away from fact. Context is actually where we see most AI initiatives break down. So again, if agents are going to do real work, they can't work on raw tables and tribal knowledge. It's just not going to get the job done. They need shared governed context, operationalized through 4 building blocks. Semantics, governed definitions and metrics. Context, the entities and the relationship between those entities. Governed tools, so explicit allowedness of what AI can do and not do, not open-ended automation. And data product, stable owned interfaces with SLAs, so automation doesn't break when schemas change. So let's go back to the churn example from before, but let's think about it in a no context world lens. So we have our AI agent. We're going to have it do our churn analysis and figure out where we need to focus as a company. Let's say we give it some raw tables, accounts, usage logs, tickets, billing. Let's say 4 tables, and some wiki docs of what churn means. And it sounds like when you hear it through an example, you're like, I don't know that that's going to work. And we're also a room of data people. But you'd be surprised how many times companies start, and I'm going to throw some raw data into my model. I'm going to throw some PDFs that have some policy for my company, and I'll just ask it questions. It's smart. It will figure it out. When you do that, you lose consistency very fast. So let's think about semantics. What are the raw fields? Last login, daily login, feature usage, open support tickets, whatever they may be. How does the agent decide what churn risk is? You may have multiple team members do the same analysis with totally different results back. Even within your own usage, within the model, like prompt history comes and goes and it's inconsistent depending on which LLM you use. And you might even get different results back on any given day. Having a company definition of what is churn and how do we calculate that, how do we think about that, is helpful input to define for the model those semantics of this is what we think churn is. Context. Does the agent understand the entities and relationships? Does it know, oh, this is part of a parent strategic account? I need to pay attention to that. Oh, there's an active priority 1 ticket for that account. So, maybe that's not the time to go send them a, hey, come to our new event email. Like the context that the team has when they operate as humans, a lot of it is those relationships. So the entities, the relationships matter a lot. Govern tools. Maybe you don't just tell the agent, and this one seems a little obvious, but again, you see it more often than you think. Oh, go find the top 20 churn risk accounts and go send them this proactive email. Maybe have them draft an email and alert a CSM and open a ticket for them on their work queue to go do that. Building in those rules up front, what will you allow agents to do with what information and what not? Building in human in the loop. And then as you build in more expertise, as your systems get better, as you have more confidence in it, you're able to then get more autonomous, but be careful how much you do up front. And data products. You know, we've heard this one before. Oh, the billing schema changed last week. The agent misreads the renewal date and the email is sent incorrectly. Versus stable customer health and renewal APIs with SLAs. Context is key. And back to my first example, visiting my friend, actually more of that data was there upon follow-up than she thought, but it was missing a lot of the context, so some of the conclusions that, in that example, Copilot was drawing were wrong. So remember, AI is probabilistic. When operating on raw tables, especially, like you increase the likelihood of hallucinations. And remember, AI acts with confidence. The end user does not know if they're right. And that's probably why, more so than not, context really, really matters. Anybody get the good catch phrase? I get it from all the models. When it does something dumb and then you ask it about it and it goes, good catch. And I just want to strangle the computer. Now that's something that we know enough about to challenge the answer. Every time I'm prompting outside of my area of expertise, I get a little bit nervous because I don't know enough to challenge it. And the more people start to use AI, the more we want to push the bounds, the more we're exploring our unknown because it's supposed to be known to the agent. And so context, and I'll talk next about inference, becomes absolutely critical because if we can build in the right context, if we can build in the right inference, then we can reduce those AI hallucinations. Then we actually get the value to start to operate at scale and get autonomous. So real-time inference, this is kind of the last thing. This is one that context is absolutely key. I wish more people were doing this, and I think we're going to get there. Not that we're not all using things like machine learning, but not from the mindset of how do we power an AI model. And one of the best ways to stop those hallucinations is to bring in what I'm calling, it's not even just inference, it's knowledge. It's getting what's in your head. People are doing, I guess it's not machine learning, it's human learning that we're doing all the time, and that informs our decision. So an enrichment layer is what can help us prevent unpredictable AI behavior. Give agents data that's already been scored, bounded, and verified, so you can start to increase autonomy safely. Risk scoring, right? Confidence and safety gating, anomaly detection, routing escalation, verification and monitoring. I'd like to talk through an example. So large language models in particular are very good at interpreting inputs, synthesizing signals, and generating recommendations or actions. But they're not inherently good at calibrating confidence. They're always confident. Detecting statistical anomalies, understanding distribution shifts, and deciding when not to act. So if you go back to the churn example we just talked about, what if we risk scored each account? So we started with that context layer, but then we introduced risk scoring on top of that. What if we used machine learning to detect anomalies like seasonality that could impact churns? And what if we took that inference information, those insights, and powered our AI models with that. Context tells you the account matters. Machine learning tells you the signal may not. And we need to power our models with both. Because now the agent knows when to act and when not to act, and that's really how you get to automate more. So when we kind of put it all together and we say, what's that pathway to agent data? And this is workflow, not architecture. It's not about consolidating everything into a single platform. In fact, I'm assuming the opposite. Like, no one in their right mind would ever do that. Every organization has many structured data systems, many content systems, and they're not going away. The issue isn't where the data lives. The issue is about how and where it's used. And so along that pathway, just to kind of sum it up, first, you have to be clear on trust. What data is actually good enough to be used for AI in production? Second, agents don't just need tables and transactions. It's policies, documents, rationale. So structured and unstructured data have to be governed consistently and at decision time. Codify your policy. Make sure agents' actions are authorized, they're time-bound, they're provable at runtime. As AI becomes more autonomous, develop the standards for how your agents access data, not just whether humans can. Have to treat agents like people. And then as agents start taking actions, this is not probably where you start, but that last step, that enrichment layer, help ground those probabilistic outcomes with more deterministic insights. And all of this, of course, you have to stay aligned to the evolving regulatory and industry standards, because scrutiny is not going away. So with that sounds like a lot. Not everybody's going to do that all at once, and we don't recommend that. So I just wanted to end with kind of three ways to get started. First, trust as a release gate is a great place to start. Like, one, it's foundational. Like, it starts with that data quality. Pick one or two AI use cases. Define very clearly, what does trust mean for you in that use case? Accuracy, freshness, lineage. And if the data doesn't meet those criteria, it doesn't ship. Codify trust through policy. Don't explain it after the fact. If you start there, that's a great pathway to get started with something that will bring real value to the organization. Second, I'd encourage you to run a joint governance review across structured and unstructured. Pick one use case. Maybe it's customer onboarding, maybe it's regulatory reporting. Bring the structured data team, bring the content team into the same room. Map lineage, agree on quality rules. Define one shared access policy. Remember, you're not moving data or merging systems. You're providing cross-silo governance that works for a single workflow. From there, figure out how to scale it. And third, treat agents like identities. You want to be able to answer without scrambling which agent accessed what data, for what purpose, and under whose authority. When you do that, the conversations around security, risk, and audit change quickly. And with that, I think I'm at time, but I wanted to thank you all. Hopefully this resonated with you a little bit. We see these patterns over and over and over again. The ones that are really moving the ball forward, they are focused on controls, they're focused on governance, they're thinking about these 5 pathways to agent-ready data, and they're moving forward. So, thank you.
Thank you, Adam. That was great. Adam, I just want to ask one quick question just before you go. What is the sort of one biggest misconception that companies have around what it means to be agent, to be data ready, agent ready?
I think the biggest misconception is actually it's at the top, because I think the mistakes that people are making around being agent ready are born out of speed and pressure to move fast and show value. And it's the classic thing we've seen in every tech wave of the CEO just wants more, so they want value metrics. More employees using it, more tokens, more this, more that. And when you push for more and you're not focused on business outcome drivers, it just drives different behaviors. So I think we have an opportunity in this room to help bring that conversation back and say, look, we're not going to go get stuck with 7,000 pilots, but we're going to build a real path. We're going to start to do some things well. And then you can actually start to scale fast, and you actually get to your destination faster.
Okay.
So the CEO gets what they want. It's just a different pathway to get there.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you so much. That was a great presentation.